been a Mac user for about 7 years, and for the last couple of years I've been using an M series model. For work, everyday tasks, music production, and recently video editing, it's been amazing. And the battery life is incredible. But here's the thing. I like to play video games. And using only a Mac for gaming, it feels wrong. It could be perfect one and only device, but gaming on Mac has so many buts attached to it. And the biggest but is Apple itself. When Steve Jobs was CEO, gaming was basically the last thing he saw as a priority for the Mac. After Tim Cook took over, not much changed. For years they promised to fix the situation, but considering the resources they have, they did very little. It wasn't until recently that Apple finally started making some real moves. They released Game Porting Toolkit, GPTK, which is cool. But let's be clear, this is a tool primarily for developers. At the same time, they killed support for OpenGL and still refused to support industry standards like Vulkan, forcing developers to rewrite games for Apple's proprietary Metal API. Even Molten VK, the translation layer that lets Vulkan games run on Mac, is an open source project maintained by the community, not Apple. So we are in this strange situation where gaming on Mac exists despite Apple, not because of them. Overall, there just aren't many incentives for developers to port games here. The audience is tiny compared to Windows, and Apple doesn't seem to take any major actions to change the situation. But all that said, native gaming isn't completely dead. Apple Silicon chips were released back in 2020, and since then we have seen ports of famous titles like Cyberpunk 2077 or Resident Evil. But let's be honest, it usually takes years for them to arrive. It is very rare to get a day-and-date release on Mac and Windows. That is why I was genuinely shocked when Baldur's Gate 3 was ported less than 2 months after the Windows release. This is exceptionally quick, considering it is a big title. Usually, if a game wasn't planned for Mac from day one, you're going to wait for a long time. And there's another catch. Some of these big AAA titles like Death Stranding are available exclusively on the Mac App Store. Why is that a problem? Well, imagine in a few years you decide to move on from Mac and switch platforms. Or even build a gaming PC. If you bought that game on the App Store, you can't take it with you. You lose access to your purchase. Personally, I hate feeling trapped in one ecosystem. I prefer to own my games on the platforms like GOG or Steam, where my purchases aren't tied to one specific machine. Surprisingly, the situation is much better if we look at indie games. Many indie devs prioritize cross-platform support right out the gate, and it makes all sense for them. Think about it. If you release an indie game on Windows, you're competing with thousands of other games. You end up being a small fish in a big pond. But on Mac, the competition is tiny. If you release something decent here, you're visible. You stand out. So for indie developers, supporting Mac is actually a huge opportunity. But overall, for now, native support is just a small percentage of the gaming market. So does that mean that Mac users are out of luck? Well, no, because there are other ways to play. First, the obvious answer, cloud gaming. Yes, you can use GeForce Now or Xbox Cloud Gaming. It works great if you have fast and stable internet and irresistible desire to pay for another subscription. But if you have a powerful M-chip Mac, why not try to use it? So, how can we play Windows games without a separate PC or laptop? Basically, there are two main approaches. Option 1 is virtual machines. This is where you emulate a full Windows setup inside your Mac. But the biggest problem here is overhead. If you don't allocate enough RAM or CPU to the guest system, your virtual machine will take a huge performance hit. That is why the best way to play is option 2, translation layers. Instead of having to run a full OS on a virtual machine, you run a tool that allows your computer to translate API calls in real time. Such tools can take Windows commands like DirectX and translate them instantly into Apple's native Metal commands. This means the game code is executing natively on your hardware with minimal overhead. It's efficient and it's fast. All of this is possible thanks to Wine, and I'm obviously not talking about the Dream. It is a free and open source compatibility layer. By the way, Wine is a recursive acronym that literally stands for Wine is not an emulator. The logic is simple. Instead of emulating the entire machine, you simply translate the instructions. You get a similar performance even on a different operating system. But no matter which tool you use, there is a catch. Not every game can be translated. If a game relies on specific non-replaceable Windows components, it simply won't launch. And the biggest hurdle here is kernel-level anti-cheat software. This is used in many competitive and even some co-op games. These systems need a deep access to Windows kernel to perform the checks, and since we don't have a real Windows kernel on Mac, these checks will fail. So, if you're a big fan of multiplayer games, sadly, these two methods will not work for you. However, if you are mostly interested in single-player experiences, you have plenty of options. Now, let's look at the actual tools. Let's start with the free options. Both apps I'm about to show you act as translation layers. They don't emulate Windows. Instead, they use that Wine engine I mentioned earlier to run Windows games directly. But keep one thing in mind, compatibility isn't 100%. Some games will run perfectly and others simply won't. For a long time, Whisky was the go-to way to run Windows games for free. But unfortunately, I have some bad news. As of April 2025, the developer officially stopped supporting the app. It still works for now, but since it's no longer getting updates, newer games or macOS updates might break it eventually. However, Whisky is not the only free app worth your attention. There is a new app called Mythic. It actually uses Whisky's engine directly, so it works in a very similar way. It's currently in alpha, but you can already try it. It's also free and open source. Mythic does let you play games from the Epic Games Store right out of the box, or you can manually import games if you have the installer files. Our built-in support for Steam is still in development. Just keep your expectations realistic. And before you download Whisky or Mythic, I highly recommend checking the Whisky site or Reddit to see if someone has already tested the game you want to play. It could save you a lot of time, trust me. Now, besides the free tools, there is one major paid option, Crossover by Codeweavers, which is also based on the Wine project. Codeweavers actively contributes to Wine, and Crossover runs on the latest, most polished version. This usually results in better performance and faster updates for new titles. But don't expect miracles. Even paid software has limits. Always verify your game in their compatibility database before purchasing. Is Crossover worth the investment? Honestly, just start with Mythic or Whisky. They are free, so you have nothing to lose. If your game doesn't work there, check out Crossover. It might be the solution you need. Remember earlier when we talked about option 1, virtual machines? I told you that they were heavy and slow for modern gaming, but they are not useless. In fact, for specific cases, they are the only solution. If you want to play older titles, especially 32-bit games, this is where you should definitely use a VM. Translation layers often fail with these older titles, so simulating the real OS works much better. And if you have never run a VM before, don't be scared. There are plenty of guides on YouTube that basically hold your hand through the process. You have two main apps for this, VMware Fusion and Parallels. VMware is free, Parallels is paid. VMware Fusion's website is definitely not user-friendly. Honestly, trying to find the way to download that app gave me flashbacks to my corporate past, and I did not like that feeling. But once you complete that quest, you get a solid app for free. The installation process will require some time and effort, but you only have to do it once. You don't need to repeat that every time. On the other hand, Parallels requires far fewer clicks to create your virtual windows, but it costs you money. As for performance, it's debatable. Parallels seems slightly better for modern stuff, but for the older titles, the difference is small. But if you ask me, I really don't like Parallels monetization practices. The fact that it's a paid software isn't the problem. I don't like the idea that they restrict the usage of my hardware, like RAM, which I already own, just to force me into a pricier plan. The fact that the standard edition limits you to 8 GB of RAM nowadays is just out of touch. So honestly, it's all up to you. But I highly recommend you try the free software VMware Fusion first. Or if you really need a native-like Windows environment, well, you can go with Parallels, but remember, for the price of a few years of Parallels subscription, you could just buy a separate PC. Now, if you want to go even further back to the 8 or 16-bit era, you really only need two free apps, one for consoles and one for old PC games. For retro consoles, OpenEmu is the way to go. It is open source and it supports a huge variety of systems, from the old Atari games to the PlayStation 1, all in a single app. On the other hand, if you want to play old MS-DOS titles, check out DOSBox. It's the gold standard for running vintage PC games like Doom, SimCity, Dune, or Civilization. Though, keep in mind, it requires a bit more setup than OpenEmu. Now, I'd love to hear about your experience. Have you tried playing games on a Mac, or did you decide to just stick to PC for gaming? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.